Pastor Nathan here. We're continuing our look at the book of Job. The last time around, we talked about the genre, we talked about the structure, we talked about the goal of the book of Job. The genre is wisdom literature. There's a couple different ways it does this. It does this through some prose, kind of historical narrative stuff at the very beginning, and then there's a lot of poetry in the middle. That's just some beautiful poetry going on in the center of it. So that's the genre. The structure is we've got a prologue, and then an epilogue, and in between we've got three separate discourses between Job and his three friends. Elihu shows up, and God shows up. There's monologues. Not conversation in that sense, but dramatic monologue happening between those kind of five characters. That's the structure. The goal of the book of Job is to really answer the question, why suffering? The bigger question, or perhaps the way that this is getting at, is what is wisdom and who is wise within the book of Job? Because in the midst of suffering, it kind of is like, well, who has wisdom? Like how do you make sense of suffering? So that brings us to chapters 1 and 2. Chapters 1 and 2 of the book of Job paint this incredible picture of Job. Job is wealthy, he's pious, he shuns evil, he does good, he has lots of kids, he even spends time offering sin offerings for his kids, just in case something happened at one of the parties that his kids typically seem to have. So Job has this blessed life, if you want to put it that way. And Satan comes into the heavenly council of God. He assembles with the rest of the angels, and he and God have a conversation. And Satan basically says, hey, after God has said, hey, have you noticed Job? He's pretty great. And Satan's like, well, he's only great because you've put this protection around him. You've given him a lot of stuff, and you've given him a lot of health, basically. If you take those two things away from him, Job will curse you to your face and die. God then says, okay, all right, I grant you permission to do this kind of testing on Job, but only this far and no further. And we see what happens to Job in the middle of this, that Job's wealth and Job's health are both stripped from him, to the point where when his three friends come, because they hear something terrible has happened to him, when his three friends come to visit him, they find him not where he typically would be. They find him on the ash heap. They find him emaciated. They find him covered in sores. They don't even recognize him. And they weep and they wail for and perhaps with Job. And then for 7 days, 7 nights, they just kind of sit together. No one talks. That's how bad Job's situation is. And yet, Job in the middle of it will say, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And it says both times that this happens to Job, that these two things are taken away, the health and the wealth, that he did not sin in the midst of these things. So this sets us up into the conversations Job is now going to have with his three friends, because we know why the bad things have happened to Job. It's not Job's fault. It is Satan's fault. And God had us allowed this testing. The rest of the book is going to try to answer the question, why suffering? How do you explain this? So what can we take away from this first chapter when it comes to suffering and wisdom? Well, we don't always know why we suffer. Job has no clue why he suffers. And while we get a glimpse at the specific reason for Job's suffering, we don't always know why bad things happen in our own life. We know that we don't deserve good things because of our sin and our brokenness, but our God does give us good things. At the same time, though, we don't know why bad things happen, and yet they do. I guess the comfort from the first and second chapters of Job is that God sets limits on the suffering, and that also we have an example in Job that in the midst of suffering, his eyes looked to Jesus, or at least to God. His eyes looked to God. And so for us too, then, our hope is, in the midst of suffering, is to look to God as the source of our strength and comfort. All right, next time we're going to dive into the arguments of the three friends, Elihu and Job, and see kind of how they try to explain why they suffer, why Job is suffering. But that's next time. Take care, and we'll talk again soon.